Okay, so Justin's turned off the music, so that must mean we're starting. Welcome, everyone, to this last in our town hall forums. This is our statewide caucus. We're going to do some really quick sort of housekeeping technical stuff because what I was hearing from feedback from each individual forum is that what people appreciated the most was the ability for all of us as a community to come together and talk with each other. So we want to allow as much time for that as is possible tonight. One of the things that I would like you to note is that in the chat functionality, and you can access chat from the taskbar at the bottom of your screen, Justin has put up the link to the Google Slides associated with tonight's forum. Tonight is actually the only forum that is being taped, and we have two sign interpreters, Eliza and Virginia, who will be signing throughout the evening, and to ensure that they are on the screen when they are truly needed, we're not going to be bringing the slides up as a screen share. So periodically, Justin will post the link. If you lost your link and need it again, you can do a direct message to Justin, who is our technical wizard extraordinaire, and the link will be posted again. One of the things that we want to share with you is that we are looking at compiling together a list of priorities coming out of our forums so that we really do want to hear your voice, what your experience is being an LGBTQ plus person in Vermont. So with that, I want to go to, what is our first slide, which is actually an acknowledgement that we are on occupied land. This is indigenous land. And as my friends from within the Abenaki nations have told me, merely because at one point in time there might have been a treaty, that doesn't mean the land was necessarily ceded. And in most instances, the treaty was to share and not relinquish resources. So I'm Keith. I am the current chair of the LGBTQIA Alliance of Vermont and a member of the liaison team. And as such, I want to acknowledge that putting these forums together has truly been a collaborative process. And at the end of tonight's forum, all of the LGBTQ plus organizations, both political, social, organizational, will be given the opportunity to share a bit about their programs and what it is that they have to offer to you. But the people who have assisted in the creation of these forums are the Pride Center of Vermont, Out in the Open, Outright Vermont. We want to acknowledge Queer Rainbow Umbrella of Central Vermont. We want to acknowledge Queer Connect for their assistance. And we definitely want to acknowledge the Samara Fund, which provided us with the financial resources that were necessary to ensure these forums did indeed happen. So what I would like you to look at on slide 4, if you've already made the link, this is our harm statement. We are trying to create a safe environment for all of us to have an equal place at the table and an equal voice. Sometimes microaggressions or things can be said that are hurtful. If that indeed does happen, Alexander and Sam are both here on behalf of Safe Space. You can find them listed in the chat in the participants list. They're available to talk with you directly and help with whatever it is that has occurred for you. If it is something of significance, we will stop the forum to address it at that point in time. And with that, you've heard enough from this talking head for right now. I'm going to let Justin, who is our tech wizard extraordinaire, to give you the fast tech overview of what you need to know to function in Zoom.
Wow, thanks, Keith. What an intro. Um, so if you're following along on the Google slide deck, we're looking at slide 6, and this will sort of tell you how to best navigate Zoom. There are closed captionings being provided by rev.com, so you can click on the closed captioning at the bottom to either display those or hide those. You can also raise your hand, which you can do with the reaction button if you have that. I believe you can also, if you cannot find that, you can just message me and I can help you and put you in a queue. If you've got something to say, I can speak up for you. You can mute your microphone, which we prefer you do. If you are not speaking, you can decide to turn off your video by clicking stop video. That is completely optional for you. And you can also click participants to rename yourself, which is certainly important when we come to breakout rooms where we will need to sign up for one of those rooms, and I'm going to be the one to put you in that room. So if your name that you sign up with matches the name that you were on Zoom with, that is very helpful because then I know where to put you. You can also put your pronouns in there so that you are addressed properly. And I think that's about it. And if you have any questions, you can hover over me and there's a little ellipsis and you can chat me or find me in the participant list and I can help you directly.
Yeah. Okay, so moving quickly ahead, one of the things I want to say at this point in time is that if people are having problems accessing the slides and typing on individual slides, don't worry, you can put the same information in the chat functionality. And Elle, one of our favorite interns from the Pride Center, will transcribe it onto stickies for us. So on starting with that slide 9, then 10, and then 11, introduce yourself. Who's here tonight? Your name, your preferred pronoun, the town where you're from, and because Rachel likes to know these things, how did you hear about this forum? So that when we look at future events and outreach, how should we be doing that? I see people from Putney, East Montpelier, welcome. Burlington.
I'm also going to just mention, Keith, real quick, that these sticky notes are adjustable. You can change the formatting, you can change the size of the sticky note, you can delete a neighboring blank sticky note to make room for your sticky note. There's also multiple slides worth of sticky notes. So,
right, there are
carry on.
9, 10, and 11 are all for introductions. Bennington, welcome Bennington. Eden, Brattleboro. What I really like is looking at, as people are typing, it's anonymous alligator, anonymous ferret, anonymous camel. Welcome from Bethel, Montpelier, Shelburne. Heard about it through the Pride Center of Vermont, Pride Center Facebook page. Fairhaven. Dummerston. Heard about it from Out in the Open. Manchester. Heard about it from my wife. All right. Anonymous Grizzly, welcome. So it looks as though we have people from far and wide participating. This is one of the advantages. Heard about it from all things LGBTQ. I, I wonder who might be associated with that. We have people from Berkshire County in Massachusetts. Welcome. So one of the advantages with Zoom is we can bring people from all different aspects, all different parts of our state together at the same time without having to worry of, is there going to be a snow squall trying to get there or to come back? And moving into a conversation about Vermont and our place here, starting on slide 12, and there are slide 12, 13, and 14, multiple stickies. Welcome, St. Johnsbury. Please share what brings you joy being an LGBTQ plus Vermonter. Feeling free to be queer. Being able to find so many people, so many queers. All right.
And for folks who are dropping stuff in the chat, I am pulling everything from the chat and putting it in the document so that it is included in the overall document with everybody else. So nobody's getting left out if you throw them in there as well.
All right. Vermont's more progressive than other places I lived. Safe in my friendly village. Vermont is small enough to find one another. I moved here and was able to be out at work for the first time. Congratulations. Outright Vermont. Raising my son in an accepting environment. The queer family I found. Dance parties. Out in outdoor spaces. Great community. State house friendly. Making things for queer fam. The care web. Potluck. Feeling all the amazing ways we express and honor our real selves together. Thank you. Being out at my job was a plus. Okay. And one of the other things that Justin didn't say is that if you look in the corner of, and people are already using them, very good. If there's a statement with which you really agree or it resonates for you, you can take one of the hearts and place it on the posting. So now that we've shared our joys, here's your next question. And it's slides 15, 16, and 17. How can we make Vermont more inclusive of our LGBTQ plus communities? Uproot white supremacy. Acknowledge intersectionality. Education mostly focused on high schoolers. Defund the police. QPOC leadership support and promotion, anti-racism, affordable housing, abolish prisons, get involved in politics, learn about connections between homophobia and racism, comprehensive health care, ensure access for people with disabilities, help get out and make changes happen. Comprehensive outreach to rural isolated queers, creating LGBTQ plus aging housing, encourage white accountability groups and LGBTQ plus community, more queer specific spaces, be out as a model to LGBTQ kids, youth. Promote education about race and our communities. Celebrate Q BIPOC joy. Support for LGBTQ youth, especially in rural communities. Good, affordable internet across the state. I saw in the legislative action where there was debate actively on expanding broadband. Affirm all types of families. Transportation queer bus. I'll go for my CDL license now.
Keith, I've always wanted to be a bus driver, so maybe you and I should go into business together, and that can be our
We could
plan.
do that.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Okay, but I'm going to have to come up with my own driver to balance when it's Emoji's turn to drive. Destigmatize mental health challenges, yes, please. Abolish heterosexuality. Working towards prison police and ICE abolition. And if people will note, there's a message from Alexander in the chat offering Alexander and Sam as support for anyone that might need it. I neglected to have them wave at you when I mentioned they were here. More LGBTQ plus faces in Vermont tourism, literature, and at the welcome centers. Okay, Justin, that's where we need to be, is the greeters at the welcome stations.
We'll just go with our bus from Welcome Center to Welcome Center.
We can do that.
I love this plan, Keith.
It takes a village. Become a board member. Become a board member at different organizations, okay? LGBTQ plus. Oh, we need our own health center. Yes. Okay. So this statewide caucus is the final forum in what has been a series of 6 focused forums that have been sponsored through starting in January. We want to use this forum tonight specifically to, to review and expand on the conversations from the previous forums. What was identified? What needs to be added? How do we continue the conversation? What are the actions we'd like to take based on those experiences that have been shared? So at this point, I'm going to ask someone from each of the previous forums to give us just a brief overview of what was discussed in their individual forums. And the first one is health justice. And I didn't notice if Taylor was or was not here.
I have not seen Taylor. I know was working the polls all day in Winooski with her Justice of the Peace hat on. So I'm hoping Eva is okay with taking over on the health justice one.
Oh, poor Eva, it's the last minute.
It is all right. I'm happy to step in a little. And also, though, with the permission to be raggedy carryover from some previous town halls that I've shared of just being like, well, I'm showing up. So, hey, y'all, I'm Eva. I use she, her pronouns. I am the programs and volunteer coordinator with Out in the Open. And I helped co-facilitate the Health Justice Town Hall, which was our very first town hall on January 21st with Taylor, which was a pleasure to co-facilitate with them. And so I'm looking, I know that Keith, you translated some notes,
Yeah.
and I'll just, I'll share some from those notes and share some from my memory of those conversations. And again, we'll have more opportunity later to dive more into this conversation. But some things that definitely overwhelmingly came up was, desire for affirming safe healthcare in our state. And that looks like a lot of different things for a lot of different people within our communities, but affordable and affirming care services is one of those things. Additionally, we spend a lot of time sort of both like talking about like what does health justice mean to folks and what are resources within our community that we're already building. And so some are within our respective organizations with the Pride Center's work, with Out in the Open's organizing work around health justice, and otherwise there's some, really incredible organizing that is already happening and resources that already exist, but also a lot of resources that we don't have in Vermont and that we need more of, such as queer and queer competent therapists and more accessible therapists, and more QT BIPOC therapists within our state for our BIPOC community members. We spent a lot of time talking about the desire not to need to educate providers, and also the desire for control of one's care. So control of knowing what care people need and desire, but having a system that doesn't allow us to always seek out the things that we know that we need for whatever that may be, whether that might be financial, age, or just a system that doesn't believe us. And so that is what we spent a lot of time talking about throughout that meeting. And I'm sure there are things that I'm missing.
And if you look at the slide, this was actually a quote that Eva shared, which was from the San Francisco AIDS Project. When we achieve health justice, people in our communities will have the economic, social, and political power and resources to make decisions about their bodies and health, regardless of identities and experiences. And thank you, Eva, for bringing that to the forum. So the next forum was on housing. And I did see that Anne from the Pride Center was here, and she was one of the co-facilitators.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anne, she, her pronouns, and I work for the Safe Space Anti-Violence Program at the Pride Center. And I co-facilitated the forum on housing with my coworker, Gustavo, who is there. Well, actually, I don't know where they are on your screen, but I moved them next to me. So it's like we're sitting next to each other. But yeah, so we facilitated a conversation around housing, and more specifically, housing justice. So the idea that we all deserve safe and affirming housing. And if you're looking at the slide, I kind of threw a couple quotes on there that came up in our conversation. So we sort of started the conversation with asking people what safe and affirming housing means to them. And I kind of organized the different responses into two different answers. I feel like people responded with saying like kind of the basics, like within the four walls of like, I need like a clean, safe place to live that functions, that's affordable. And something came up around affordability being like, we don't want affordable housing to just be like off in the side or like a piece of housing, but like I should be able to afford to live wherever I want to live. And then there was the piece too that kind of pieced in with housing justice, which was that our communities also need to be safe and affirming. So it's not enough to feel safe within our four walls, but we want to be able to feel safe when we're going out to take our garbage, when we're walking in our neighborhoods, when we're interacting with our neighbors. So we had a conversation about that, and we looked at like what safe and affirming options. Can you hear my dog jingling in the background? And just like below the stairs, so maybe not. Okay, he's like playing in the background. And so then we were looking at what safe and affirming housing options are people familiar with in Vermont, and honestly, not a whole lot. I think word of mouth came up quite a bit, and also different like Facebook groups or different forums, and people did share that they've had some positive experiences with different like county-based housing programs. So then our conversation got to our needs, and I just highlighted a couple of the needs on this slide, which is, like I said, like affordable housing that's well maintained, close to public transportation, and essentially just like all housing should be affordable, right? Because like housing is a human right, housing is healthcare, housing is safety, it's all of those things. And we had conversations about LGBTQ plus assisted living facilities, and the right to age in place, and how we should have programs like that in Vermont that support people who want to do that. And then there was talk of like having like a rainbow bulletin board or a resource, a statewide resource where people can go to find out whether or not landlords are LGBTQ plus like affirming, and like what neighborhoods like that people feel are safe and affirming. And part of better housing access is also better public transportation. So that came up in our conversation as well. And yeah, Gustavo, feel free to chime in if I missed anything, but if I didn't, no worries.
You covered it beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. And as you're hearing people give their overviews of what occurred in their individual forums, keep in mind, is there something about what's being shared that resonates for you? Because when we get to the breakout rooms, you're going to get to pick one of these topics to engage in a more lengthy conversation and come up with some lists of recommendations of how we might move forward in response to those specific issues. So the next one, Eva, I think it's you again, because we're going to talk about rural queerness.
Awesome. Thank you, Keith. Yeah, so our third forum for folks who attended or are just here for the first time or didn't attend was specifically on rural queerness, which is something that we as an organization at Out in the Open focus on heavily. It's within our mission that we work to support our rural LGBTQ community members by creating community visibility, knowledge, and power. And those are some of the core pieces that came out in this rural queerness town hall that Justin and I co-facilitated. And during the spaces, so a couple of different things. So like you all are hearting, I love to see that in the Google Slides, that some of the things we asked a couple of different questions. One of the questions that we asked in our intro spaces that we had for smaller breakouts what brings you queer joy? Because that's something that's really important to myself, I think, and so sort of like centering joy in ourselves. And so that's something that we did during our intro spaces. And then as a larger conversation, we sort of talked about what does it mean to be a rural queer? What does it mean to be a rural queer person, a rural LGBTQ person within Vermont? And, there was a lot of holding of the multiplicities of what does it mean to be a human? That's that's sort of like what came up was like, the stars are beautiful and it's really incredible to be close to nature, and also being in the woods is work. And it's incredible to be myself in this place that I feel at home in, and I feel isolated. And, so we received like a lot of the existing in the multiplicities of what it means to be a human in this world and in Vermont, and a rural LGBTQ person in Vermont. Other things that came up for folks was having to be the educator of what does it mean to be the queer person, the LGBTQ person in your school, your town, your workplace, is something that came up for folks a lot as well. And also community and resources and living in a place that feels like home is something that came up for folks too. So we broke out into 4 breakout spaces during that time, which was community connection and personal connections and intimacy, health and mental health, mutual aid, and community safety and resiliency. Some of the threads that I just like wanted to share with folks that were sort of stuck out to me within those conversations were that, there's a wide range for folks to connect in community, and seeking both in the way that we are continuously seeking a wide range for folks to connect in community, and also there exists a wide range for people to connect in community within rural spaces. That racial justice is community safety within our rural spaces for LGBTQ community members. A big piece also that was resonated not just within the Rural Queerness Town Hall, but something that was mentioned before, but continuing virtual spaces post a pandemic world to increase connection and accessibility within our spaces as well. And that a deep desire for all people's needs to be met and for our communities to be thriving is something that also came up in our rural spaces. And that's sort of just like the big sentiment of rural can be queer, queer is rural, and they don't, they're not necessarily interchangeable. They coexist together. So that's what came up in the Rural Queerness Town Hall.
All right, thank you, Eva. And I've got you in case there's someone else who, gets shy at the last minute. You're my backup. So the next forum was our youth forum, and it was a forum that was specifically for youth. And there are 2 different slides here, one from Nick, one from Haley. And you all can tell me what is the order in which you would like to discuss these.
Hi, I'm Nick. I use pronouns. My slides first, and it kind of goes over more logistics stuff. And Haley's is more discussion, like whatever. First, again, I'm Nick, they, them pronouns. I'm a youth organizer working at Outright, and I help facilitate the youth town hall. We had 14 youth who attended, and we scheduled it. So we began with a welcome. There was music playing. We talked about expectations for the space and just like keeping it safe, and moved into one-on-one groups for icebreakers, just to kind of allow people to open up. We asked like questions about self-care and like what pets they've they have I have a pet with me right now. It's a really easy way to open up. Then we moved back into the larger group to kind of talk a little bit more about what we were planning on doing. We asked our first big questions of the night, and then we moved into groups of like 5-ish, not like super big, but not one-on-one either. The first 2 questions we asked was, how does it feel in your community as a queer youth in your school, church, family, etc. And then we asked, what is an issue that you face as a queer youth in your community? And what's something positive that you face? Like, what outcomes have occurred because of your queerness? We discussed that, some people took notes, and then we brought everyone back into the big group. We took a 10-minute break to play a scribble game on the computer. And then we asked a few more questions and moved everybody back into small groups. We answered the questions, what uplifts, dismantles and dismantles problems or issues faced by the queer community, and also just like generally groups that are affected by white supremacy. We asked what people have personally experienced. One of our colleagues shared a personal story of theirs. We asked what they've witnessed and what they would have done differently. And we talked about what has happened, what worked in the past, what hasn't worked, with, trying to solve issues that are occurring. We talked about what possibly could be improved and what just needs to be tossed out. And then we discussed how adults, and especially LGBTQ plus adults, can show up to help fix or just show up to be there for LGBTQ youth around these issues. Like, what can we do to support? And then after those questions in that small group, we brought everyone back in. We had people share out. Again, we had notes taken. And then we closed. Haley, you can talk.
So hi.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. Somebody asked me to say religious organization rather than church. So yeah, not just churches, religious organizations.
Okay, so hi, I'm Haley. I use she, her pronouns, and I also co-facilitated the Youth Town Hall with Nick and then also one other person. So as Nick said, we did a couple rounds of breakout rooms, and in one of the breakout rooms, we asked questions like, how does it feel in your community as an LGBTQ plus person? And we took this information that they wrote down, we had them just write it down directly on the slide deck that we made and came up with some major themes that we saw. And these major themes were that they saw an open use of slurs, teachers in schools ignoring issues, and then families being unsupportive and unhelpful. And then in one of our next breakout rooms, we asked basically, how have you experienced this issue? If so, like how so, and how has it affected you? So we heard some people saying that they heard the use of slurs or phrases such as "you're too young" or "you're going to hell" being encouraged and normalized, both in just normal community life along with in school life. Noticing that teachers don't do anything effective, which makes reporting issues seem useless. A simple warning just didn't seem enough because teachers will either ignore it and brush it off or give a simple, hey, don't do that, which doesn't help anything. And then also a lot of people were scared to come out and being their true selves due to unsupportive family or community.
So then we also asked what ways we could help solve these problems. We asked for both adults and youth how we think that we could solve these problems. So a lot of people said educating, so educating adults and youth, both in the community and in schools. Some examples were creating education books or packets to hand out and read, or having mandatory faculty meetings on how to be respectful and inclusive to all students, and then bringing in outside resources and speakers to schools to really bring that inclusivity and just educate in general. And then another thing was schools should have a safe adult who can be trusted with these issues. And as we talked, people said that this adult should be someone who says more than just "I'm sorry," and then they should actually go and confront the student or teacher and just actually do something about it, like a trusted adult that you know is going to help you and not just brush it off. And then lastly, a lot of people said creating awareness, because that's important. A lot of people don't necessarily see these problems as an issue, and it's important to create awareness for the problem so everybody knows they're going on, and hopefully that would help.
Okay, thank you, Haley. One of the things that I truly missed in the era of COVID was the Queer Youth Summit that happened every year at the State House, because your presence as LGBTQ plus youth with our legislators taught them so much, and it increased their awareness of the issues that weren't being dealt with. So thank you. So going from youth, we looked at the full life spectrum, and I can see Rachel giggling already because the next forum was on aging, and Rachel from Rainbow Umbrella of Central Vermont is here to report on it.
Yes, I'm Rachel. I use she, her pronouns, and Keith and I co-facilitating the Forum on Aging. So we started the forum by acknowledging that ageism is prevalent and insidious in our society. But those who attended the Aging Forum debunked all those stereotypes and beliefs. So we had a really great conversation about the joys that come with aging. And for full disclosure here, I want to mention that the Forum on Aging also had an invisible subtitle, which was Dreaming. So when we spoke of joy, there were two overarching themes. Authenticity and choices came up. So when we think of authenticity, people were saying things like, I feel more at peace with myself. I don't care as much about what people are saying or think about me. I'm living a slower pace. And those resonated with many of the participants in this forum, which most of them come over time and while living life. So the second theme, arching theme, was having more choices in time to do the things that we want to do. And you can see that in the slides that people were coming up with all kinds of activities. And, we were more interested in doing things that brought us a lot of pleasure and joy. So after reveling some about our joys in the past, the conversation turned to looking forward, moving forward. And there was an unexpected, and I'm going to say thoughtful conversation that followed. And it wasn't about ticking things off a bucket list, because for the most part, people were already there. People were doing the things that they wanted to do. Or if they were doing it while they were working, wanted more of it. But there were three, three identified priorities, and there was housing, socialization, and health. And it seems to be a recurring theme at all of these forums, but specifically what we wanted around health. As a community, we wanted to be seen and to be heard and to be affirmed as a whole and also individually. Therefore, there was, what got identified was a need for cultural competency training for service providers. And that was not only around health, although that's certainly the category that it came out of, but it's also true for all of our institutions. And then the socialization group came on saying they were a very social group, revealed two needs. An overwhelming interest in having more opportunities to socialize, no surprise here, and also finding ways to maintain independence. So, when people were thinking about, aging and being independent, they were thinking of programs that are already in place or are starting to get into place in different parts of the state. And we're looking at Neighbor to Neighbor, which is happening in Burlington, and It Takes a Village in Montpelier. And we just found out at the forum that there's Cambridge Cares in Cambridge. And all of these are providing services for people who are either choosing to age in place or aren't able to get out and get the support and services that they need. So these can be treated separately, but there is also a connection that seemed pretty obvious once we all came together. So even though they were identified under the same umbrella, I started thinking when I was putting this together, is there a way that we can incorporate them and bringing a benefit beyond the service we provide? Not that I have any answers. That's why we're all here, right? The final priority was housing. And this took a little bit of a different slant than the housing forum. And we certainly need to be looking at all the great ideas that the housing forum came up with. But what we were looking at were we were looking at it through two different lenses. And one of them was aging in place. I mean, you have some people who want to stay home and you want others who want to live with other people. So when we're looking at aging and aging in place, those are beginning to be looked at in some of the areas in Vermont, and we need to be doing more of that and looking at ways in how we can expand those services and support. And then the other one was more LGBTQ communal living. And we weren't focusing, affordability comes up all the time, but also what was added was intergenerational community, and a community that's queer and LGBTQ affirming, and certainly mixed income. So again, I think that when I was looking at this, I was really struck by how these three, at least these three priorities were connected. And I think it really would be important if we could find a way to incorporate these priorities into the work that we are already doing. And also that we can continue to dream about, being more bold in our visions. Let's be audacious about what we want rather than, being careful and more moderate. So that's all we did in aging. It was really a fun group.
All right, thank you, Rachel. And the next forum, Reggie, you're up, was racial justice, where we learned that Justin was willing to stay late if people still were engaged in conversation. So, Reggie, what do you have to share with us?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Keith. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. So I co-facilitated the town hall on racial justice with Eva, and a broad question. Oh, also, I should, I'll give a small intro to just me and who I am, because I'm here on behalf of the Pride Center of Vermont. I work for GLAM Vermont within that umbrella, as it were. I'm a health and wellness coordinator with a main focus on HIV awareness. And also through the Pride Center of Vermont, I help run Thrive, which is a program group for queer trans people of color. So super happy to be here and happy to talk about racial justice with you all. So to our group, we asked a broad question of what does racial justice mean to you? And some of the report back was having our individual needs met, income equity and reparations, housing rights, land and food sovereignty, workers' rights, accessible legal resources, community safety, proper childcare, academic resources, healthcare resources, trust in the community that folks live in, accountability, intersectionality, dismantling the white supremacist system, and not sexualizing a person because of their skin color. So that was feedback we got from our group. And then furthermore, we asked what specific racial justice work did folks see happening in Vermont? And we got a number of local organizations, people messaged with who are doing work within the field, like I Am Vermont 2, Youth for Change, Migrant Justice, Color Lines in the Green Mountains, the Root Social Justice Center, Lost River Racial Justice, Susu Healing Collective, Racial Equity Alliance of Lamoille County, Education Justice Coalition, Women's Justice and Freedom Initiative, and also the Radical Dharma Practice. So they have events locally from time to time. Other work that people saw happening in Vermont was addressing BIPOC history erasure in the school system, the formation of different shared mutual aid networks, grassroots social empowerment movements led by BIPOC youth, people who are opposing the new women's prison, folks who are acknowledging Vermont's history of eugenics, people who are leading the charge for changing racist school mascots and advocating for policy to prevent further appropriation. And then also the Richmond Racial Equity Group, fighting to close loopholes in Vermont in impartial policing policy. So those are some notes that as an entire group we came up with. Then we did split into breakout rooms, caucuses, if you will. There was a white caucus, mainly so that white folks could focus on work that is necessary for them to do. And then a BIPOC caucus group also, which I can speak more to. I can say that some feedback when we all met back together and shared back from our breakout rooms was that the White Caucus named a lot of fear around engaging in conversations about race at all, and named that sort of as a roadblock for them. And it was met with, understandably, a lot of upset, because it's sort of a poor excuse in 2021 to say that, you know, you're unwilling to hold your white peers accountable when they are racist, because you are afraid of backlash, it would seem. So that was some feedback we got. Also, a lack of action steps being named, but I think that also leads back to the fear conversation. So I just wanted to name that. It was a big thing that came up in our share back. But for my group, we had a limited amount of time. We had about 35 minutes to discuss, and we kind of only got to a few questions of the ones that I had laid out, which is fine, because that's how, you know, group sessions go sometimes. But the first question was, what resources, if any, are you lacking to support your mental and physical health? And then a sort of follow-up question to that was, what do you see as the barriers to attaining those resources? So folks named, they spoke about lacking a proper space to heal among BIPOC community, and a lack of intentional spaces for joy. A question that was posed was, where is the time and space for our joy? Working in white spaces and feeling overwhelmed by it was named. Difficult finding BIPOC community or resources, especially during COVID. I'll name that, you know, as a aside to that. So COVID obviously has exacerbated some of the issues that folks were already feeling. And not seeing yourself or community reflected. Also, lack of culturally competent mental health care, or lack of access to healthcare that isn't rooted in anti-Blackness. And so another question we asked was, how do you see yourselves reflected in the LGBTQ plus community in Vermont? And some feedback was, people that look like us don't exist. Other folks talked about feeling stepped on when they are in LGBTQ plus activism spaces organized specifically for racial justice. The idea of feeling overwhelmed and or drowning, being literally physically pushed away by white allies, and also the feeling of the urgency of doing, so having to do and, you know, perform labor, overwhelming the power of being together. So taking precedent over the ability to just, you know, be in community, essentially. Finally, the last thing that we were able to really kind of get into in our breakout room was, what brings you joy? Which was something that, like, people were dying to get to after that conversation, which was really laden with a lot of trauma, but also, I think, was necessary in a space like this, where, you know, a lot of white folks are listening, to be shared. But what brings you joy was the next question we got to. And folks responded, my friends bring me joy, music, dancing, food, cooking, eating, sharing, gardening, and also having a space just for us. So for me, as you know, an organizer on behalf of the Pride Center of Vermont, it was definitely just another, you know, I guess, message to me that more space for, intentional BIPOC affinity spaces for joy are definitely needed and being called for. So that was my main takeaway.
All right, thank you, Reggie. So we're going to start transitioning into people thinking in terms of what is the conversation they would like to continue? What is the topic for which they would like to engage with other people from within our communities to come up with an idea of how we might move forward on those issues. But before we do that, I want to put a question out to you. What did we miss? I mean, we talked about health justice, racial justice, housing, aging, youth, rural queerness. We have members from various parts of our community together tonight. If you were to engage in a conversation, what might be something you would like to talk about with other members of our community that's not part of those groups? And there is, of course, slide 25. Trans misogyny within the LGBTQ plus community. Poverty, community, grief and trauma, how can we help each other? Maybe some more recent issues, more narrowly focusing on what took place. In this K-shaped economy, so many of our community is in careers impacted by COVID, and what can we do about that to help those being left behind? This pandemic has been described as a low-grade trauma, effectively leading to PTSD and significant increases in depression. What can we do as a community to help around this? Neuro and psychic divergence, disability justice, faith communities, sex work, LGBTQ plus.
Keith, if you're speaking, we're having some difficulty hearing you. Well, while Keith figures out that, continue to put your thoughts about what we missed in slides 25 and 26 of the Google Deck. I have no idea what Keith has read so far, so I don't want to just repeat that, but
You could.
Oh, are you back?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Well, can you hear me? Okay, because after I saw in the chat, it's like, thank you, Kristen, for saying, are you talking? I got an error message on the computer that said the microphone had died. So actually what I would put out at this point, because again, as I had said at the beginning of tonight's forum, what we really wanted to do is create an opportunity for people within our community to be able to really talk to each other. And looking at the types of things that you're putting forth, I have a question to you. If we created an additional category that was, how do we create and sustain community, would that get at sort of the core of what people are suggesting? Because what I'm seeing people put on the stickies are about, how do we support each other? How do we reach out to each other? How do we help with, the impacts of COVID and depression and addiction and services? So what do people think of that idea? Because as Eva has said on previous forums, we can drop the curtain and you can see all the magic that happens, and we get to decide what it is that we want to talk about. You get to decide what you want to talk about. So I think it needs to be more specific, who gets to be in that community and who does not feel welcome. Maybe it's a conversation that can be covered in each breakout.
Yeah, I would say, Eva, that's a great suggestion. And I think for time's sake, we should probably start signing up for those breakouts.
And then take a 10-minute break.
Correct, yeah. So that we have enough time to get to the breakout rooms.
Yep. Thank you, Eva. Okay, so the sign up for the breakout room starts on 28 and 29. And what people can be thinking about going into the breakouts is, one of the things that we had hoped could come out of this statewide caucus is an identification of needs. Acknowledging that we are currently faced with limited financial resources and personnel. If you could designate one project, what would that be for your individual breakout room? And then if there were no limitations on economic resources or personnel, what other projects would you include? Because one of the things that we are hoping, one of the things we are hoping is that we can then have something for which, when we approach legislatures, when we approach the state infrastructure, when we approach our own communities and network, we have information to share with them saying, if you're looking at how your organization takes the next step forward, this may be one of the things that you want to think about.
So folks should be signing up for those breakout rooms, which I see you are all doing. Like I said at the top of the hour, make sure that your name closely matches what your Zoom name is so that I know where to assign you. And Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to take a little break right now while people,
Yes.
perfect. People still have time to sign up. Little bio break, and we'll be back in about 5 or 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
I guess I could try hypnotherapy.
All right. There's a few people that I do not have signed up yet that I am hoping we can find homes for them. Just a few though. And most of them are safe space advocates. If you have a home that you would like to be in, you let me know, and they might be in the chat. That is something that I have not been looking at. So hopefully Elle has been, but yeah, that's where we're at right now. But otherwise, I'm going to open the rooms. Keith, can you confirm how long we should be in these rooms for?
I would say about half an hour, because when we come out of it, what we're going to do is compare what it is that people came up with, create a priority list, and then it's each organization giving a plug for their program and the thank you and good night.
Excellent. Then I'm going to open the rooms, and whoever is not in a room, you'll be stuck with me, and then I can put you in a room or not. But here we go.
Or you can have your own conversation.
That sounds really exciting.
So I'm waiting for Justin to tell me that indeed everybody is back.
People had 60 seconds to transition, the quickest transition of everyone's lives to get back into this room. So I think for the most part, unless we lost some folks, I don't know. We've got 33 here. Seems decent. Let's go for it.
Okay. So I'm looking at, people have already been filling out their slides. So the first slide that I see here is from youth. Would somebody from that forum like to just briefly state what it is that you all came up with, what you saw as being your foremost priority, and then given unlimited resources, where would we dive in?
Yeah, so we kind of just talked about different projects and resources that we think would be good to have available or to just have in general. So some of these were having pride organizations showing up in support of Act 1, which is an act that would put ethical guidelines and standards on the integration of diverse content, proper education for faculty and staff in school systems, because there are many adults that are ill-informed and therefore engage in ill practice. More social affinity spaces, safe spaces in every community. So that would be like a safe haven or house for LGBTQ plus youth if families are not welcoming, creating awareness of the issues as well as the existence of the queer community through creative and engaging projects and platforms. Having stickers to put on folks who use slurs, calling them out and letting them know that they were phobic. Community message board, physical or virtual, that will keep folks connected with within the community, mainly just to be like, hey, we're here. holding more conferences such as equity conferences and bringing speakers into schools to educate staff and students on diversity and inclusion. So that would be like having Outright come and give trainings to schools.
All right, thank you. That is an incredible list. So what I see next is rural queerness. Is there someone who can report out?
I can give a quick report. And
Thank you, Eva.
yeah, just many of the things were surrounding that conversation of what is community connection and priorities around ways to connect. Less a list of priorities and more a brainstorm list. And some of the sort of like brief things to talk about was the ways that the organizations represented here can be better at being actually represented across the state and in all rural places and in all across our state. And that's one thing we talked about. In the future, dreaming towards a future where we can gather in person, the Out in the Open Summit and other gatherings to Skillshare, connect, and build community. And we talked about townwide organizing as a way of power and building relationship as well. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And aging? Is there someone who can report back out?
I can start anyway, and everyone else can jump in. We focus more on congregate communal living because it seems like there are a fair number of programs that are already looking at aging in place. And so one of the things that came out of our conversation was possibly having congregate or living in 5 areas throughout the state of Vermont, because I thought it would be difficult to move to a different area away from the friends that I've already have in the area where I would be moving from. So if we had 5 different facilities, regional facilities, then people could still maintain those friendships. Anyone else has any other thoughts they want to bring up? Alice or Anne?
So the 5 areas would be based on the districts of the council, 5 existing councils of aging. And the resources vary greatly between the mountain communities and the cities and larger towns. So they'd be very different types of communities. But it's also important to note what type of staffing or other personnel would be there, would need regular updated cultural competency trainings, etc. We talked about maybe part of the facility being intergenerational, or at least having a school nearby for some mingling with younger folks and so forth. Possibly, depending on different structures, some setups could have some creative or commercial space to it too. So it's not just housing, but more of a community with other activities going on, retail.
Like a real good French restaurant downstairs.
And we also mentioned that it was we also mentioned that it would be important that it be mixed income.
Okay. Racial justice. Is there somebody available to report out?
Yeah, I'll report out. This is Kim. We talked about, we kind of debriefed a little bit more about the Racial Justice Town Hall, and then we got to priorities. We talked about wealth redistribution to QT BIPOC communities and individuals. funding mutual aid efforts focused on non-white communities. We talked about a multiracial decolonization action committee as a kind of continuation of what might be possible if last week's conversation continued overnight and into the next week. Spaces for Black joy and Black solidarity. We talked about who is not at the table and resources to bring who isn't here, wherever here is. To bring and continue to bring programming to and for and by BIPOC folks. To do all that is possible to ensure that white isn't the given or assumed identity in queer spaces. That white folks do their separate learning to address white supremacy and how to dismantle it. And we talked about various resources like Black Lives Matter of Greater Burlington's White Caucus for Collective Liberation. And there's also the Black Caucus for Healing. Peace and Justice Center has white anti-racist spaces, and Showing Up for Racial Justice has chapters all over Vermont. And there's a fantastic workshop coming up in the next week, I think, that Sarah's looking for the link for. We talked about understanding how intersectional oppression works and how knowing queer history and theory doesn't mean you know everything about racism or racism in the LGBTQ community. So knowing one identity and having that one identity doesn't mean that you understand the other identities that share space. We talked about also, after you read all the books and go to all the workshops and all the conferences, what are white folks doing to end racism? Like, it's fine to be in book clubs, and it's fine to talk to folks who share racial identities, and then, but what are you doing right now?
All right, thank you, Kim. We'll make sure that all of the resources and the sites that you've been sharing in the chat ends up in the final listing that goes out to all of the people who have been participating. Thank you. So, health justice. Is there someone willing to report out?
Yep, it's me, Bradley. So we talked about, some of the issues with health justice that were pointed out at the town hall, such as a lack of people who meet our needs, and how difficult it can be to find them and travel to meet them. We talked about lack of training for healthcare professionals and in terms of queer issues and what we might be able to do to call on the med schools and the nursing schools, or even the working professionals in their continuing education to bring focus on and competency on queer issues to the medical community. And we talked about how, what we might be able to do, or at least looking for ways that we might be able to recruit and retain more providers, in particular mental health providers who are queer identified and queer affirming, as there's a serious need in the community for that. There are issues that I can identify and aren't totally sure how to work on them, but things like increasing insurance acceptance, different types of insurance at small providers that are providing the affirming care, and then also systems, identifying the systems that help us find providers that maybe we need to stay away from because they're not only not affirming, they're actively discriminating. And we talked about the Pride Center's list of providers, which was recently produced, and what might be done to increase visibility of that list, to bring its attention to providers who we know are affirming and maybe aren't on the list, and also how to bring that list forward, social media and other ways, so that it's a living, present resource for people that can be accessed and that it's well known in the community.
Thank you, Bradley. So, Gustavo, I think that means it's time for you to talk.
Beautiful. Hi, everyone. I'm Gustavo, and I'm reporting back on the housing justice conversation. So we started off pretty concrete, thinking about putting together, similar to the VDHP that was just mentioned, putting together a resource using the collective knowledge that we all hold as LGBTQ plus orgs across the state of places, landlords, neighborhoods, rental agencies in our regions that are safe and affirming of LGBTQ plus folks, and also maybe including lists of places to avoid, people to avoid around renting. And that's something we all already kind of know by way of word of mouth, so why not put it down into a resource that anyone across the state can access. Then we talked about a queer welcome wagon project for volunteers in every town or every sort of county to say, hey, I am an LGBTQ plus person in this area that is willing to connect to any new LGBTQ plus folks who move here, and help them kind of acclimate to the area and be a queer friend. Credit to Anne for that wonderful idea. And then we moved into sort of big dreams projects, specifically thinking about creating LGBTQ plus specific housing, maybe taking over dorm buildings that are for colleges that are going under, or taking a look at what are spaces that can be developed to create LGBTQ plus housing that is multi-generational, that has options for folks regardless of income, that is varied and beautiful, and also is intentional community building. And again, brought up the idea of a housing facility for LGBTQ plus folks who are housing insecure, and specifically one that moves away from the shelter model to give a sense of independence and safety, giving everyone their own private space and also access to anything that they might need to kind of build back up from where life has put them. And for all of these, we were really focused on a conversation around how do we make sure that BIPOC LGBTQ plus folks and New American LGBTQ plus folks are at the center of all of our planning for all of these. And also, how do we make sure that BIPOC LGBTQ plus folks can create and develop our own spaces outside or separate from white LGBTQ plus spaces, in recognition that our experiences are different and we need our own spaces sometimes. So that is our housing conversation in about a minute and a half.
Thank you, Gustavo. And I want to acknowledge that I know that we've run over time. Thank you all for hanging in here. Thank you, Justin, for not cutting me off yet. Sort of to wrap this all up, what we are going to be looking at doing is taking all of these incredible suggestions, all of these incredible ideas, and writing them up in a manner and in a format that we can then use them to either inform our own work within our own communities, or when we're reaching out to and working with allies, when we are reaching out to and looking to our legislators for what are the things that they're going to support, what are they going to be advocating, and looking at the changes that we might be able to bring about within our geographic communities and within state government as an infrastructure to make Vermont a more inclusive place for LGBTQ plus Vermonters. So Bradley had something that they wanted to share with you all before we concluded for the night. And what I'm going to say really quickly before Bradley starts is that there will be an evaluation going out to people. We really want to get input from you, and I will be sending back out to all of you what came out of this forum. So Bradley.
Thank you, Keith. I'll be super quick because I know it's super late. I'm Bradley. I'm just an audience member, a community member. I'm not working for any of these groups. And so I just want to point that out for what I'm about to say. But I just want to say, first of all, how much gratitude I have for all these groups, organizations putting on these events and working together and not being territorial and creating this space in this community, because this is a heavy lift and a lot of work and a lot of hours. And I know some of these folks, I observe from watching social media and their websites that I think they're working around the clock and not sleeping. So I have lots of appreciation for them. And I also want to say that in my day job, I'm a fundraiser for hospitals. And so I put on events like this for hospitals and things. And so I see them from the other side and how much work goes into this. And so I kind of want to call on us as the community, as the audience here, that if you can, I know it's been a long year for all of us, but if you're in a position where you can, without harming yourself, support these organizations, please do so. I mean, the space that they've created is really special and really incredible. And I've only been in Vermont for a year. I came up here from Eastern Kentucky, which looks like Vermont, but doesn't behave like Vermont. And you don't have this kind of network for rural queerness. And this is amazing. And I think if we want this to continue, we all have to invest our time and resources, whatever that is, into this. So I just wanted to put that out there. And again, thank you to everybody who put this on and made this happen, because this was an awesome series.
All right. Thank you, Bradley. And since we're over time, I want to encourage everyone, as Bradley has said, to look at the website, Facebook pages for, out in the open. And I see Eva has put a link to their organization in the chat, the Pride Center of Vermont, and specifically recognizing the Safe Space program, which is working with people from within our communities who have experienced violence and trauma. Rainbow Umbrella of Central Vermont, which provides a vital resource to people who live in the greater Montpelier area trying to create community. Outright Vermont, which provides support to our youth in ways that actually our youth get to define how services are provided and is respectful of them. There's also Queer Connect that has a branch in Bennington, and they just started one in Rutland. So if you know of people in or around the Rutland area, please look for Queer Connect. They have a shared website, Facebook. You can find out what's happening in Rutland, and they might be wanting to do their first Pride Day celebration this year. So with that, thank you to all of you who have participated. Thank you to all of you who have helped put this together. And particularly, I want to thank Eva, who has kept me sane at times when no one else really did. And for Justin, who doing this series of virtual town halls was Justin's idea. And Justin has really been the technical wizard that has made this happen. So thank you.
Amazing. All right, we're done.
We did.
After 7, it is complete. And thank you all for participating. And this was recorded, and you can relive it if you want. Or something, but yeah. All right. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
And thank you to our 2 sign interpreters.
Yes.